Hello, and welcome to the Stoughton Writers Group on cable. So in cable, I'm Mike Hartman, the host, the author of Hartman, a Memoir. And today I have a guy that's no stranger to Stoughton cable. He's known as that guy, but his real name is Noah Beit-Aharon. Noah, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Your books are so interesting. I mean, they read like a movie. You know, you read like a movie like that. But I first want to know, how'd you get the name N.S. Stoughton? How'd you get
my pen name. So that's my first two initials and my wife's maiden name. We got married very young. I was 21 and she was 23. I had opinions and made choices that I wouldn't necessarily make today. And one of them was to pressure her to change her last name.
Mm-hmm.
She'd maybe have changed it back, except it was a lot of paperwork to change it the first time. And so, you know, this was kind of the best reciprocal gesture I could make is to name, you know, my authored books kind of after her.
You know, when I was negotiating to marry my wife, that was one of the things she wouldn't change.
Yeah, I mean,
it was like, you know,
it is like it's completely legitimate to make to not change your last name or to, you know, I mean, hyphenating with a name like Beit-Aharon is not, you know. You don't need two hyphens in a name. In any case, that's where the name N.S. Stoughton comes from. It's because her family name is Stoughton.
I thought it was a great alias for checking in hotels. Nobody ever finds you. You know that. So I thought I was going to steal it on you. Maybe somebody else will too. When you talk about writing, was that part of the writing the book though? Was she part of it when changing the name of it?
No, I think I had decided on the pen name before I started writing the book, but I started writing the book when my daughter was less than 2 weeks old.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me exactly 13 months to write the first draft.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it happened like as my
newborn
was becoming an infant.
Yeah, I gotta start you say, how'd you write a book with a newborn?
So that is not as uncommon as you would think. Having talked to some other writer parents, the answer is that in the middle of the night she would wake up, and I would change her diaper. My wife would nurse her. I'd change her diaper again, and then I'd try to get her back to sleep. And if I put her down, she would start screaming, and if I kept her on my chest, she would fall asleep. But then being a first-time parent, I was terrified to fall asleep that way myself because, you know, they warn you not to do any co-sleeping and so on. And so I was absolutely certain that if I fell asleep with her on my chest, then I would like roll over and crush her or something. So I had all this time in the middle of the night without being able to fall asleep for safety reasons. And I would just lie there in bed with my daughter on my chest and my laptop on my knees and try to pound out my 500 to 1,000 words every night for months and months and months. And so the vast majority of the book was drafted between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning.
Nice. I would say my daughter, when she couldn't sleep, we'd watch C-SPAN, and then we'd watch the agricultural hearings.
Yeah, but did that put you to sleep?
It put me to sleep too, yeah. But then she went to agricultural school, so I think there's a direct correlation. And with your daughter, there's a definite correlation where she's going to be a writer. So she was getting the message of writing while you're holding. Yes. You have to tell a little about your daughter about writing her novel. That's fascinating.
Yeah. My daughter Lila, who is 12 now, is writing a novel based on an imaginary game that she was playing with her friends for over the course of many recesses in elementary school. They're still her very close friends, and she learned about the process of turning what had been a game, like a Dungeons and Dragons game, into a novel, novelizing it. And she was like, well, I can do that. So she started novelizing the imaginary game that they had been playing during recess, where they were pretending to be, you know, warriors of various kinds, and she's already like, I don't know, 12,000 words in. So she is really diligent in a way that I was not as a child, and it's very impressive to me, and it's good. You know, I've read it, and it's definitely first draft, but it's the first draft of someone who knows how to write, and that's exciting.
So should be a guest on a future Stoughton Writers
Be a
Group show.
future guest.
We'll book her when you get the book published.
Yeah.
That's incredible too. Before we talk about your book specifically, talk about how you learned how to write. I mean, you were homeschooled and all that. It was interesting how you developed that skills of writing.
I was homeschooled until high school, with a brief stint in fourth grade in Australia, because we had my dad had a business trip, a long-term contract that brought us to Australia for 6 months. And, while we were there, I didn't know anybody, and my parents were like, "You're not homeschooling here. You're gonna meet other kids," because I had friends at home from the community, from wherever. So I had 6 months of fourth grade, but other than that, it was like a couple weeks of kindergarten and then high school. But mostly it was just reading a lot of fantasy, and trying to emulate what I read, and coming up with little sci-fi stories and stuff. I wrote a humorous piece about a man who falls in love with his washing machine. And I was in, when you're homeschooling, you don't have to just be like sitting at home with your parents teaching you stuff, right? There's a whole homeschooling community, and I took a class for homeschoolers at the Museum of Science, with Sharon Fontaine Terry was the teacher there, and she is now in charge of various things on a national level of nonprofits and stuff in the rare genetic disorders space. I took a creative writing class when I was like 11, and that's where I wrote a bunch of those cute and silly stories based on various prompts, and it was just something I wanted to do. I grew up reading, especially Diana Wynne Jones, but also, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, Lloyd Alexander, and these other authors, and I just loved that stuff and wanted to make it myself.
Was there a point where somebody told you, "No, I'd be a writer"?
No, I don't think so. I think I told me to be a writer.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that I went to college on the assumption that I couldn't do writing as a career. I went to college saying, like, I'm gonna take science classes and stuff. I'm gonna do some interesting career and do writing as a side hobby. And then I found myself, because at Hampshire College you can pretty much take whatever, at least at the time, you can take whatever classes you wanted to. There was very little in the way of requirements. And so I just discovered that I was taking all these writing and history classes and nothing in sciences. And I was like, maybe I'm telling myself something here, that I should just go for it. And it didn't stop me from getting, jobs. I worked in elder care for 8 years before.
But you majored in Jewish studies and creative writing, which I thought that was interesting. That was interesting combination.
Yeah. Well, my first book, which did not get published, was straight up fantasy. It had no Jewish content in it. It was just about the stuff. And I started it as part of my my Division 3, my final project for college. And my advisors kept saying to me, this is fine, but you could, if you added more Jewish content to your writing, if you wrote something that was more Jewish with all of this knowledge and interest that you have in Jewish studies, then it could be a lot more interesting and really break ground in a way that your writing right now is just rehashing stuff. And I completely ignored them and finished that novel. And then when that novel didn't get published, but I did get an agent for it, I started writing something new, and it became this series. And this series is very Jewish and has a lot of Jewish theological content in it, despite being secondary world fantasy, right? There's no Jews in this story, but the background of, the way the world works, the way the relationship between the people and their gods is based, pretty much entirely on Jewish theology in various ways.
I better mention the books. Well, we can the books of Silent Hill, Among the Fallen, and A Breach in the Heavens. I'm going to Silent Hall. Okay. When I read your books, I'm baffled because I can't do that. It's not like you watch somebody like craft like sculptures. Like when I was in college, I used to love going to the art department and watching people take a piece of wood and then going back like a month later or so, it looked like something. But I know I can't do it. And I read your books. And I read your books, and author my own book, and I can write books and stuff. Yeah. I go, I can't do this. There's no way. If you locked me in a room for 100 days and said you can't come out, you can't eat, you can't drink or anything, and you have to come. As I wrote a fantasy book, I would be starving to death and bad shape. How does your mind work like this?
So I think a lot of fantasy, because people have a notion of fantasy and sci-fi literature, and especially of fantasy, that it's kind of a childish genre where it's like, people are just making stuff up about dragons and magic and stuff. But I think at its core, fantasy is a genre where you can take metaphors and make them literal, and you can discuss things that are deeply personal to you or that are important to the world at times, but do it in a way where you and I discussing something, we might come up with some wild metaphor or might use a common expression or something. And then in fantasy, I will say, okay, but what if that was real? What would that world be like?
So it's sort of backwards. They take a reality and then make it into fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when I read the Torah, when I read the Tanakh, when I read any part of the Bible, really, I see a history of my people's thought on how the world works, and I see a real fear of the unknown, and this notion that our world is controlled by gods who don't explain themselves to us, right? That you'll be minding your own business, and then there's just a plague, and it's like, well, my God is mad at me for something, or is mad at the king. Maybe he's not even mad at me, right? Maybe our king did something offensive to the God, and now just like tens of thousands of people are dying, and what can we do to appease such gods? And so I went and I took and made that literal. And I said, okay, let's have a story. In the first book, Silent Hall, I have a story, 5 teenagers, for their different reasons, totally different, they don't know each other for the most part. They end up on the same boat leaving their island nation. And shortly upon arrival, they learn that some god or other has wiped out the entire population of their home in a plague, in a very magical, not at all questioning, well, could this be a natural phenomenon, sort of a plague, right? Mm-hmm. It is very clearly some god got mad. And then they spend the rest of the book trying to figure out which god and why. Mm-hmm. And is there a way for them to avoid that? Does that god also want to kill them, but is geographically constrained? Like what are the parameters that they need to function under? And so, but it's all based on this real fear that I see in our mythohistory of people just being terrified of
the doomsday,
the natural world.
The doomsday effect. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's like,
but how'd you?
Okay, so what if that were real? Yeah. So then I start exploring that. And I do not tend to do a lot of plotting ahead of time. Mm-hmm. I tend to write in an exploratory manner. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know when I finished the first book what would be happening in the second. I didn't know how many books there would be after that first book, if any. And it was only as I was finishing the second book that I learned there would be a third. And and not a fourth, that it would be a trilogy, that the publisher was planning for it to be a trilogy. And I said, okay, great. Now I know my parameters. Now I know that the next book should be very conclusive, should wrap it all up in an interesting manner, and that I shouldn't leave too many threads dangling. Right. So then I just had to kind of come up with what could be the conclusion of this story.
That's the question I have about dangling threads. Like, your characters have to maintain integrity throughout the trilogy. How do you do that? I mean, how do you decide this person's going to be this, or do they, without going off the rant, so to speak, go sort of totally different than would be against the story?
I think a lot of it is just having integrity as an author is about figuring out who your characters are and sticking with it. And you can see how real people transform over time, right? I'm not the same guy I was 20 years ago,
right.
But a lot of threads are still there, and you see how people, how the things in their past lead them to the things in their present and future. And then obviously there are choices to be made within there. Like, you don't have to have, it's not like you, everything's predetermined.
Yeah.
But, you look at the characters as if they were a real person, and you ask yourself, where would they go from here? Given a life's worth of experience, there's like a 10 or 11 year gap between my second and third books. Not how long it took me to write them, but what happens in them. And so I do a lot of speculation about, what would have happened in those 10, how would their personalities have developed from being late teenagers to being late 20s.
How you live with these characters for a trilogy? What was it like to let them go in the end of the third book?
It was, there was one character that I couldn't wait to let go of, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And I killed them off.
Was that a tough decision, or did you?
No, it wasn't. I was kind of, I was kind of sick of them. And one of the things about them was that they had a lot of potential. And this happens with real people too, that some people are just wasted potential, right? You meet them and you're like, this person could go far. And then you look at them 10 years later and you're like, this person has, through a series of choices, ended up not making of themselves what they ought to have. And I made a decision fairly early into the second book that, like, this guy's flaws are going to haunt him too much for him to be the hero that fantasy readers want, right? Fantasy readers want,
they were cops and robbers.
Yeah, like the awesome hero. And this guy thinks he's an awesome hero, and that's his flaw. Right? His flaw is that he has come to believe that about himself. And nobody who believes that they are truly heroic is going to end up a great person.
Do you keep track of them? Do you whiteboard them? Do you do any?
It all stayed in my head.
Really? So, all in your head did that?
It all stayed in my head, except that I treated the books I'd already published as canon.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was off to the printers, then it was true. Right. And I couldn't go back and say, well, actually, never mind, magic works some other way.
The shower,
right?
The famous shower scenes.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Like, I was not going to do that. So even though I didn't plot book 3 when I was writing book 1, I had to have book 3 relate to book 1 like it had really happened. I was partway through book 2 and I was like, uh-oh, I only gave the whole world one language in book 1.
Uh-oh.
That was a mistake. Like, worlds don't work that way. And so I had to come up with an explanation of why my characters didn't speak another language, even though others did exist. But I felt it was important to do that explaining, that it's not, I shouldn't just hand wave and say, like, yeah, sure, in book 1 there were no other languages, but, like, there are, surprise,
Yeah.
So there had to be a reason why they didn't speak those other languages. So I could look back on what I'd already done and say, this is the truth about these characters, and then figure it out from there. But for the most part, I didn't like write out character studies. It was just like it was in my head and it was in the books.
That's amazing. You could do that and figure them out too. Characters stay with you though. Were they with you 24/7 when you were writing the books, or did you were able to put them away when you were doing your other stuff you were doing?
They were with me a lot. I tried to make writing a daily practice. It wasn't always, but the thing about making it a very frequent practice, if not daily, is that they're in your mind enough for your subconscious to be working on the problems. Because a lot of drafting especially is sitting there and being like, oh no, what do I want to write? The problem isn't that like I don't know how to write words. It's like, what do I want to say? And you spend all this time figuring out what do you want to say and why is this not working the way you want it to? And it is 100% possible to draft a novel over a period of 10 years and come back to it only every fourth Thursday or whatever. You can write a book that way, but if you make it a daily practice or a close to daily practice, you make it a very consistent practice of thinking about this book, just thinking about it all the time, then you start to have those moments where you just woke up or you're in the shower or whatever, and suddenly you figure out what it was you had to do, how to fix it.
Yeah.
And I have found that when I don't make it a really frequent practice, I don't have those moments because my subconscious is working on something else, right?
That's exactly what
it's not working on the characters and their issues. So
I know you write late in the night. Is that your standard thing to do, or?
It was, and I think that's part of why I've been having a harder time drafting nowadays than I used to, is because I am just more tired at night. I am less of an insomniac than I used to be, and when I try to write at other times of the day, my head is too busy with other stuff. But when I try to write at night the way I used to, and I'm like, okay, it's 9:30 p.m., time to pound out some words, then I find myself just being too tired and going to sleep.
Yeah.
So,
do you dream about the book while you're sleeping?
Sometimes, although weirdly not often.
Really, I do it all the time. That's why I keep a pencil and paper next to my desk, on my bed rather, because I have to get an idea for a column or a book.
Yeah, it's almost weird to think that considering how much my subconscious was working on it, that I would just be dreaming about it all the time.
That's what I was wondering.
It was mostly during waking moments when thinking about something else that something would just pop in.
I think your brain relaxes as a writer too when you're doing that. So I came up with a story that about what it would be like to play golf in heaven. It was just, but I wrote it in a notepad and I wrote the joke lines because that's what I do. Then I wrote the story around it. But I think those ideas come to you like that too. And we really didn't talk about your books much. I'm scared enough to talk about the endings of the book because I do not want to give it away.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's my fear. That's one of the fundamental rules of this.
I will say one thing about endings of books, which is a thing that I've heard like second or third hand, not straight from Chip Delaney's mouth, but Samuel Delaney, who's a great writer in the science fiction and fantasy world. He had has a saying that the solution to one book should be the problem of the next. And I hadn't heard that particular phrase when I was writing the books, but it was very much that concept was still in my mind, is that no solution is permanent, and often solutions carry other problems with them. So at the end of the first book, not too big a spoiler, we have a giant tree that wasn't there before, okay? And the giant tree that wasn't there before is the solution to their problems. But it is also the cause of all their subsequent problems. So
See, you could.
There's the giant tree.
The giant tree. You convinced me to read this. I mean, I've started. I'm into it a little bit. And I was reading when we were waiting going on do the show. Got fascinated by it because it goes back to, again, I can't do it. Is there anything you're fascinated about as a writer that you wish you could do?
Oh man, I really wish that I had a more maybe florid isn't the right word, but people there are books that I've read where just the words are delicious,
Right.
And I here and there, like 3 sentences per book, I might get something like that where I really feel like, man, this is good. Like I want to eat this sentence, but that's not for I know people whose every sentence that even comes out of their mouth is like that.
But
and it's like that's something I envy. I wish that I could write something where people would read it and say not just that the characters are beautifully characterized and the plot's really interesting and the setting is whatever, but like, wow, what a pleasure these sentences are to read.
it's funny because I'm a hold the book kind of guy.
Yeah.
I've been reading some on audio because I was interested in the book. And we have 2 authors on recently, Mary Ford and Maureen Boyle, who wrote different books. One's about, and you read their books and the words will come alive when they're reading it. I was mesmerized by that because the craft and the language they use it. We got a minute left. I just want to ask, what advice would you give to a young writer, a young Noah?
Okay. 2 pieces of advice. First piece of advice is finish the draft. Just finish it, write the whole thing, and then stop. It's okay to abandon a project if it's just not working for you, but it's like if your issue is, just finish something. But this is actually really important and something I only discovered while querying literary agents, which is there exists a thing called standard format.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there exists a thing called standard manuscript format. And if you're trying to submit your work to a publication, it better be in standard manuscript format, because otherwise the slush reader is going to open your manuscript and say, nope, never mind, this person doesn't know what they're doing. So look it up and follow it.
Interesting. Well, thank everybody for watching the show. No, I really want to thank you for coming on. It's been an interesting show, and I really enjoy your writing, and I appreciate all you do in the town, too.
Thank
you. I'm Mike Hardman. We'll see you again soon.